So, YCS Hartford. Wow. Just when we think we knew what the meta was, it was never what we expected. What's going on with y'all, big dog? And it is an amazing day for Yu-Gi-Oh! I hope that your day is going phenomenal, but if it isn't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day. Speaking of such, it is Update Monday, but we're actually going to regulate that to another video later on this week. I want to talk about the spiciness, everything you need to know about the meta, because it has completely changed. That's right, guys. Huge events like YCS Hartford and other events over the weekend has changed the landscape of the Yu-Gi-Oh format. And today I'm going to be bringing you an update on some of the newest tech cards and why players are using them. I'm also going to be talking about some of the top decks of the format and why the event unfolded like it is. So if you guys did not know, YCS Hartford had 1,200 people there, and our top 32 breakdown is unique. So there were over 1,200 players at YCS Hartford for this weekend, and it's really interesting to see how it broke down into top 32. There were 7 Sword Soul Tingy, 7 Punk decks. That is the strategy from the Grand Creator set, getting its shine on because of Battle of Chaos and other factors. There was 4 branded Despia, a lot lower than what we would expect since it was one of the most well-represented decks at the YCS. 3 Sky Striker, 3 Fluunderies, 2 Tritron, 2 branded Outlich, 1 Adventure ABC, 1 Rocket Dragon Link, 1 Ignister, and 1 DDD. It was actually really interesting to see how YCS Hartford unfolded, but before we get in the deck list, let's break down some secret techs and why some of these strategies topped. One of the biggest things that a lot of players were seeing over the weekend was Mystic Mine. Now, if you guys have played Yu-Gi-Oh! For long enough, then Mystic Mine is one of those cards that makes you want to reach over the table and punch someone in the face for playing, but was quite effective at the event. And the reason why Mystic Mine was just so effective was because players weren't siding enough back row removal. Cards like Cosmic Cyclone and Twin Twisters weren't being played as heavily, and players were allowed to just activate Mystic Mine on certain boards like Despia, which doesn't have a spell or trap disruption, and then wait it out until either the opponent decked out or you drew enough cards to be able to win the game. Now, this genuinely is one of the most frustrating things about Yu-Gi-Oh, but I don't want you to get caught slipping in this particular situation. Sideboarding a card like Mystical Space Typhoon or Cosmic Cyclone, even a Twin Twisters if you notice that your opponent is back row heavy. Harpy's Feather Duster is also a really good card to out the Mystic Mine, can be crucial for you to win the game going forward. Mystic Mine's huge relevance is because there are strategies that don't put a monster in the field that can negate spell or traps, or only put one. All the opponent has to do is force you to use that spell and trap card disruption and then activate Mystic Mine, and you're going to be sitting there for a while, like what happened on so many times during the event. But another card that was seen in almost every single sideboard, if not the main deck, was Dimensional Barrier. Dimensional Barrier was extremely effective at being able to stop the Sword Soul Tingy strategy. Just flip this card face up and declare Synchro Forehead, and also great against the Despia strategy. If you ask me, I think this and a host of other cards are the main reason why Despia did not see the placings that it should have. It was the most represented deck at the event, and only taking 4 slots and letting 2 other strategies take the majority, especially when they get hit with the same card like Dimensional Barrier, is we not really for that. It was really interesting to see how Dimensional Barrier unfolded into the format. Players were playing cards like Trap Trick to see it even further. Being able to have up to 6 copies of Dimensional Barrier on your opening turn could really stop Despia in its tracks, and players were getting ultra aggressive by playing it in the main board because it can stop not only Sword Soul, it can stop Despia, and it was pretty good against Drytron, preventing them from being able to Ritual Summon. Another card that was fairly good that was being played in a lot of decks was Anti-Spell Fragrance. This is really good if your opponent wants to use spell cards to be able to break your board like Lightning Storm, but is also extremely good against the Despia strategy as they won't be able to use cards like Branded Fusion to start off their play. Evenly Matched was incredibly powerful, especially since we're in a format where, again, there aren't a lot of spell trap negations. Being able to use this card to force your opponent to only keep 1 card can be detrimental to their entire strategy. The only drawback is that you had to give up your battle phase. And what I noticed that players weren't playing enough of was easily Droll and Lockburger. there were so many strategies inside of this format that searched multiple times in a turn. A mainboarded Droll Lockbird was actually something that players could sorely have used. It could have ended a lot of combos. Contrary to popular belief, the Despia strategy actually does search a bit, so does Drytron, and while Sword Soul may not have been affected, there were so many other strategies that were playing the Therion or the Adventure Token package that if you would have Droll Lockbird, they probably would have had to stop at their first search, meaning that they weren't going to be able to go into their combo. Now on to some really spicy tech cards that I did see throughout the event. We gotta talk about them. Doug Seath playing Night Beam was like the ultimate throwback to you old school Yu-Gi-Oh players, while also being a fairly effective card in the format. The reason being is if you are playing a strategy like Despia or Sword Soul, a strategy that is weak to Dimensional Barrier, being able to use this before your opponent could flip it up and declare the type would actually kind of secure you to game. A lot of strategies in Yu-Gi-Oh that do rely on one type are extremely powerful into this format, so Night Beam being able to destroy a card like Dimensional Barrier, or against the Despia matchup being able to destroy Brandon and Red before they want to use it, could outright put the tides in your favor. There is one drawback to Dimensional Barrier that I do want you to be aware of. If your opponent can activate any other card effect on the field or in their hand, they can then chain that face down card that you targeted with Night Beam, and yeah, you kind of wasted a Night Beam right there. But a card that I do think that you guys can take away from that was extremely good as well was Blizzard. Blizzard is amazing because not only does it stop your opponent's spell card, it prevents them from using that card effect for the rest of the turn. Take for example, if your opponent wants to use a card like Raigeki to blow up your board, you can go ahead and use Blizzard, return it to their hand, and even if they were to activate a second copy, they wouldn't be able to gain its effects. This card was extremely good because it could be used on your turn or your opponent's turn offensively and defensively, seeing that it was a quick play spell card. Imagine being able to stop your opponent's cards like Brandon and Red and cross out Designator, and then still being able to stop your opponent's powerful spell cards like Forbidden Droplet if they did not send a spell card, Harpy's Feather Duster, and Lightning Storm. And lastly, a card that I noticed that stood out was Foolish Return. This card's ultra rare printing has already skyrocketed in price, but it's really good if your opponent were to use card effects like if they were tributing a Cyber Angel Benton for a Drytron monster, you can use it then to return it so they wouldn't be able to get their Benton effect. You can also, of course, use it against Eldritch cards. They won't be able to cycle them. You can use this card to be able to return them back into the deck. You can also use it when your opponent uses Branded Fusion, sending Albaz in their Despian Tragedy, using this card to return the Despian Tragedy or the Albaz. That kind of prevents them from fusion summoning if they don't have the substitute, so this card actually does have its place. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump on in and see some of the deck lists at YCS Hartford and other events. And of course, if we do get more deck lists, I'll be able to pin them in the comment so you guys can see as many deck lists as possible. Now, this actually not only topped the Las Vegas Regional, it got first place at YCS Minneapolis, and it also did top 32 YCS Hartford. If there's one thing to talk about is that Ignister is definitely solidifying its place as a very good deck inside of this format. Not only is it extremely budget, this particular build does play 3 copies of Mystic Mine because again, if your opponent isn't playing a way to out it, you can always use this card to be able to stall out the board until you get the correct card. Also, there's bonus points if you can get rid of your own Mystic Mine by activating a field spell card, allowing you to pop off. And of course, this deck can always make the Arrival Cyburst at Ignister. That card is unaffected by card effects and extremely good in this format because there's not a lot of ways to get rid of it. I would like to say that that was one of the surprise decks, but it's been topping so much, you really can't say it's a surprise. Moving on into the top 16, I have 5 Punks, 3 Fluunderies, 2 Sword Soul Tingy, 2 Sky Striker, 2 Tritron, and 2 Despia. One thing I do want to point out is that Sword Soul did lose 5 slots in 1 round. That is kind of crazy. I think that Sword Soul and Despia are pretty much on the same par as a very good tier 1 deck, but the higher the levels of competition already play the cards to be able to counter these strategies, and that's where they'll start to struggle. And the Punk strategy, only losing 2 players, that is a strategy you 100% have to watch out for. Unfortunately, as of recording this video, I don't have any of the Punk deck lists, but I do have a Punk strategy that actually just so happened to get 4th place at an 1,000-man event at YCS Pasadena. Now, this was Kyle Waterbury's 4th place Pasadena deck profile, and we can probably draw parallels once we get the other Punk strategies out. Some of them played Therion, some of them played Adventure, but basically one thing I do want you to be mindful of this Punk strategy is that if it goes first, it'll figure out what you're playing and then build a board accordingly. Being able to Xyz summon into the Zombie Vampire forces both players to send the top 4 cards from their deck to the graveyard, and then they can special summon one of those monsters. Summoning this card for the Punk strategy gives them the information on what you're playing, and then they build their board accordingly. Some particular Punk decks play the Artifact engine, allowing you to lock you out of special summoning from the extra deck, but more often than not, they're going to make a Hot Red Dragon Arcane Abyss, Better on the Floor, and other huge powerful monsters alike, followed up with a Therion King Regulus if they are playing the Therion package. This is essentially a combo deck that puts up a lot of disruptions on the board, really dependent on what you are playing, and they're going to figure it out if they don't know. What was really unfortunate is that Punk pretty much stopped there. It didn't get past the top 16, but it was a really fun strategy to watch, and actually is going to probably take place of the Adventure Token Synchro deck. Another strategy that isn't necessarily a surprise to me was Drytron, and Mike Valentino probably is pioneering the Drytron deck that you may want to consider playing if you are playing Drytron. This particular list looks standard, and there's actually no Dimensional Barrier or Anti-Spell Fragrance here, not even a singular Mystic Mind. But what this deck does better than almost any other deck inside of the format is that it already plays a Dimensional Barrier inside of the main board. A Morphactor Pain the Imagination Draco Overlord, try saying that card 5 times fast, is a monster that negates Xyz and Synchros as well as fusion monsters while it is face up on the field. It also forces your opponent to skip their main phase 1, meaning that they have to immediately go into battle phase on their turn, and that can be very hard for them to be able to play through. The Drytron strategy is actually incredible. When going first, you can set up a Morphactor, or you can set up a Morphactor when going second if you don't want them to activate their effects. But the biggest hitter is Cyber Angel Natasha, allowing you to take multiples of your opponent's monsters and go for the OTK. Drytron is ridiculous, but I think that's because players weren't really necessarily hip to maining or sideboarding Droll and Lockbird. I think once players start to do that, Drytron will take a pretty serious hit, but will still be a top deck. If you are an average Despia player, there's not anything ridiculously different about Matthew Ellis's Despia deck, other than him playing Screams of the Branded, which is really good if your opponent wants to super polymerization you. You'll have a fusion monster sent to the graveyard, you can summon one back. But this deck actually just seems to have finished evolving. One thing I will point out for Matthew is that he made 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird and the Biruta Primal, being something that a lot of players just outright said that they weren't prepared for. I said it in my hand trap tier list last week, is that these cards are sneakily good, and if you are main boarding them, you can actually catch your opponent off guard until they start respecting them. But now that I feel that people are in the know, they might just start respecting these cards. I actually have to take that back, because moving on to top 8, there were 2 Punk, 2 Sky Striker, 1 Fluendereese, 1 Drytron, and 1 Sword Soul. My apologies, guys. Punk did actually make it into the next round, which is still a testament. Not a lot of players were hip to the Punk strategy. Now they're going to have to know that there is a combo deck that can put out multiple disruptions, as well as still being able to use Artifact Scythe to prevent you from special summoning from the extra deck, or just play other versions like the Therion or the Adventure Token version. In the top 4, this is where Punk does fall. Surprisingly, Drytron and Sky Striker are here, and we should have already expected Sword Soul and Despia to be here. Unfortunately, there won't be any Sword Soul versus Despia in the finals, as both of those strategies had to go against each other, and I just so happen to have Grim Yu-Gi-Oh's list. Shout out to him, and of course, if you want to see his channel, I'll be sure to link him down below in the comment section. There wasn't really anything special about this Sword Soul list. It's fairly standard if you have seen a ton of Sword Soul. There are 12 hand traps inside of the main board instead of going second cards, which actually I think is the only differential between my list and his list. That's kind of scary. This is one of the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Despite Dimensional Barrier being in players' sides and main, but unfortunately Grim Yu-Gi-Oh! Had to lose to Despia, as, I mean, sometimes that's just how life be. And then there's the finals, Pojang, I hope I said your name right, being a complete mastermind in utilizing some of the best techs that happened at YCS Hartford. His Sky Striker deck does not necessarily surprise me here. Of course, you got your 3 copies of Mystic Mine inside of the main board, being ultra toxic today. And Demise of the Land actually allows you to activate Mystic Mine from your deck when your opponent special summons a monster, and that's typically when you want to activate Mystic Mine. The only amazing thing is that since there's so much special summoning on your turn and your opponent's turn by your opponent, you can use this card pretty much any time. There's also the really nasty trap trick inside of the main board, as well as dimensional barriers. I have to say, if there was anything that really makes this Sky Striker deck go, being able to main board and almost search dimensional barrier, 6 copies in this deck, but also an infinite impermanence if you need that free negation, and then playing 7 copies of Mystic Mine, the terraforming, the 3 Demise of the Land, 8 copies with Metaverse. That sounds like a winning strategy. Artifact Sanctum with Artifact Scythe when he is forced, or if he wants to go first, preventing the opponent from special summoning from the extra deck and building up tempo to be able to win the game. It's not really surprising that Sky Striker actually won the YCS when you consider that some of the best cards in the format or at the event at that point in time was Mystic Mine and Dimensional Barrier, something that Sky Strikers can play very well. And that is all that we have for the meta analysis today. If there's anything that you guys want to add, please go ahead and let me know down below in the comment section. Maybe it's something you want to add to the event. Maybe it's something you want to add to these meta analysis to make them a lot more fun and lively. Of course, if you want to see more amazing content, you can go ahead and check out these videos. And if you want to see Master Duel Cali, you can check out Master Duel Cali, as I'll catch you on the next one.